wanted to be the only one, given the difficult time of selling it politically. What's more fruitful, I think, in terms of policy, is trying to build up the low levels of human capital of low-income kids who are now in K-12 schooling. And in this second book, we're featuring examples of proven programs that have attained some level of scale and success in boosting the achievement and attainment levels of low-income kids. We have a chapter about the Boston pre-K system, which is a very interesting case. The pre-K classrooms have all adopted a proven pair of math and reading curricula. There's been a lot of work in the last 20 years or so testing out different kind of curricula in a very rigorous kind of way. And we know that there are some examples of pre-K math curricula that are proven to boost math skills of kids in pre-K. Same way with literacy curricula. And what the Boston system has done is to take a couple of successful examples, merge them into a single integrated curriculum, provide a lot of professional development, provide ongoing coaching for the teachers to enable them to implement this curriculum in an effective way. And there's a nice evaluation study that's showing big gains for pre-K kids in the Boston system after a year of this integrated pre-K program. We feature a set of charter schools in Chicago in elementary grades that have been proven effective, where it's a very similar kind of reason, where you've got a very well thought through curriculum. There's tremendous energy devoted to training teachers in the curriculum. There are resources that are being spent to provide ongoing coaching to the teachers as they're having experiencing questions as they try to implement this curriculum. And then we also have an example in New York City of a move towards smaller high schools that was done in a very systematic way, and it proved to be effective also. So the common element in all of these was not only did you have an element of accountability in these reforms, but you provided teachers and administrators with the tools to implement curricula and organizational structures that would be effective. Right? So it's accountability, but it's providing tools where people can meet the accountability goals. And then we've got a chapter about economic support programs like the Earned Income Tax Credit, which I think are an essential component. So the common elements, accountability coupled with what we call this educational infrastructure that enables teachers and administrators to actually accomplish the goals. So let me end this thoroughly depressing thought by emphasizing how important this all is. The United States has lost its leadership, and whether it will be a leading economic power in the next 25 years is going to depend on how successful we are in educating the current crop of students. And not only is it going to affect national prosperity, but it is cutting to the very heart of what we think the American dream is all about, our ability to raise kids who stand a good chance of doing better than we did. So that's the picture. We need to do something to restore this line to its slope prior to 1970, and I hope we have some ideas about what the problems are as well as what some of these solutions might be. Thank you very much. All right, we have time for questions. Yes.
Any strategies for intervening with people that are currently young adults who went through the school system and through the last 20 years of knowledge?
I'm less familiar with strategies, post-secondary strategies. I know that there's been a lot of experimental program work in this area, especially with community colleges, to try to develop successful community college models. One of the premier evaluation firms called MDRC, they have a nice website with a lot of information. They've been doing a series of experiments on scholarship payments that are contingent on performance. So it's a system where there's a grant. Different states have tried this that ranges from $600 to about $1,600 in a semester, and it's conditioned on someone being low income, of course, but demonstrating enrollment, meeting certain benchmarks in terms of maintaining at least a C average. So their credits have to be at a certain level, there has to be a certain grade level, and only in those, under those circumstances will the payments be made. And that, over the course of a year, seems to be very promising. It's boosted the fraction of students meeting these benchmarks by 10 to 20 percentage points. They're in the midst of all this, and a year from now we'll know a lot more about their success. But stepping back, there are a lot of these kind of experiments that are going on. Some aren't proving to be successful, some are, and I'm hoping very soon that we'll have some successful models that states might consider. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. I was wondering if your research looked into at all. You were mentioning the enrichment and how the spending on enrichment, and I was wondering if the research at all looked into the sort of the privatization and commodification, even you could say, of some of those enrichment services going into the private, tutoring schools, for example, and a lot of the activities, that maybe in decades past were not cost-based. Is that something that you looked into, or that you do know of any research that gets into that?
Well, there's certainly a lot more of that, right? I mean, you can just document the growth in those industries. In these expenditure surveys, you know that higher income families are using their income to buy more of these things. It used to be the case. So your question about the effectiveness of these things, or just documenting their growth?
I guess I'm just interested in the extent of the growth, and at the same time, I think you've seen less open play and things that kind of once used to be taken for granted, and now are kind of, if there's not some kind of monetary transaction, maybe they don't happen. So just kind of, I guess, just the extent of that.
Yeah,
is my interest.
There's a wonderful book by Annette Leroux called Unequal Childhoods, Lareau. It's a comparative qualitative study of upper middle class families versus working class and poor families. With field workers spending a lot of time with the kids and the families, trying to understand what sort of structural differences there are in the way that kids are playing and families are managing their kids. And there's this night and day difference, as you might expect, with what she calls natural growth being the philosophy of low-income families, where kids are outside all the time playing with other kids and making up the rules and so forth. And at the high end, it's what she calls concerted cultivation, where kids are projects and families are spending enormous amounts of time taking them to sports and lessons and things like that, spending a lot of money on that too. And she is tracing through, she's just gone back, she started in 5th grade and now the kids are age 20 or so, and she's looking at how the kids are turning out. It's very stereotypical in terms of the upper middle class kids are all going to good colleges and setting kind of course that will take them into lucrative occupations. The working class kids are struggling a lot more. You know, it's hard to know exactly what role these parenting styles played in that success. There's one strain of argument that kids should be able to play by themselves and make up rules, and but you know, if you look at when kids enter school and ask to what extent are there differences in terms of not only academic skills but also behavioral differences, attention differences, and things like that, you see these big gaps that are favoring the higher income kids, not only for knowing words and numbers and things like that, but also for positive behavior and the kind of things that you might hope that would be developed in natural play, but for whatever reason there are these big gaps. So, you know, it's really hard to attribute how kids turn out to these kinds of differences. But I would recommend this book, Unequal Childhoods, as a very thorough study of what these differences look like and the extent to which they seem to work to the advantage or disadvantage of the kids. Yeah.
That same graph, I was looking at it when you first started talking about it, and there was a stark difference, and then you said that was inflation adjusted.
Everything that I presented was adjusted for inflation.
What was amazing about the figure was that it actually, the inflation adjusted dollars increased for the lower income group as well, not nearly as rapidly.
Right. So that's a good point.
And so, I mean, I guess my question is, are we creating a new kind of education for kids? And so that, because just in terms of you know, it changes the way you think about
Right.
sort of the educational environment they're being raised in.
Right, that's a great point. If you look you know, down at the 10th percentile of the test score distribution, there's a growing gap, right? We saw that. But the actual level of achievement with some of the tests that are comparable across time, there is some modest, very modest progress, even among kids at the bottom in terms of their test scores increasing. Much more at the top, the gap's increasing. So the question becomes, how should we think about that progress in light of all this? And I would bring it back to what I was talking about in terms of skill requirements. And I think this is a very important point. Some people think, well, if only we could get back to the way schools were, where they were focusing on the basics.
Diagramming sentences.
Diagramming sentences. The kinds of skills that those schools provided, especially the working class, lower middle class schools, for a high school graduate, right, would not equip someone now to get a middle class income in the way that they did before, right? Part of it's that dramatic drop in blue collar jobs, right? Things have changed. Things have changed in a very dramatic way. Skill requirements have been upgraded in a very dramatic way. And going back, getting over somehow the problems that we have now, getting back to where things were, that's not going to do it. So, it's kind of unfair. Things are shifting so much. Other countries have managed to figure out better than we have, I think, how to adjust to that. A very positive development in the United States are these so-called Common Core standards that have been developed and have been adopted by most states. They're trying to take advantage of the latest thinking about math and literacy and science, achievement skills that kids ought to know, how much in first grade, how much in second grade, and so forth. There's a new industry now of textbooks that are trying to gear their textbooks to the Common Core goals. It used to be, America was very successful with a very local control model for schools. And a lot of innovation came from dynamic school districts that in the 20th century, over the course of the 20th century, would be developing new ways of promoting education. I think a local model isn't nearly as effective these days because of these increased skill requirements. And this kind of top-down, it's voluntary, the Common Core standards, but most states have subscribed. I think having some kind of higher level set of standards, in a globalized economy, a single state can't think that it needs to educate its kids less than another state. So to the extent that we can bring this common set of reasonable standards to bear on how we structure education, I think that's the way to be successful, because going back to the good old days, we're not going to get back to the good old economy, so we need to change it. Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions you had is, have you asked students, and, in the face of all these challenges, resiliency is a core feature. Have you looked at the data from, welcome to California, the California Healthy Kids Survey that comes from the Department of Education in West Ed, and you look at the Resiliency Youth Development Module. This is asking kids how they feel and they relate as individuals stuck in these situations, and there's a tremendous correlation between achievement and those factors. So have you looked at that data set? Because I think it's powerful, or would be powerful for you.
Yeah, there's one of the chapters in the book looks at expectations that kids have for their schooling, and pulling on surveys going back to the 70s and trying to get as much information as possible to bear on this. What's interesting is that even as the attainment gap has widened, expectations back in high school and in middle school, they haven't increased apace, right? Low-income kids are as optimistic as ever about their chances of going to college and graduating from college, almost all the way up through high school. It's not really until the last few years of high school that they learn somehow, right, about the gap between what they think is going to happen and what's likely to happen. So, it hasn't really rippled back in terms of expectations, which may be a good thing and maybe a bad thing. But for whatever reason, the kind of gap in between expectations and the reality, that's increased substantially, because these expectations are just as high now as they used to be.
Have you looked at all about the way chronic absence plays into success?
Yeah, not explicitly, but I think absences are part of a syndrome of disengagement that a number of kids experience as they go, especially into middle school and then certainly into high school. It can be a problem in the early grades, chronic absence, but I better not say any more, because I don't know that literature very well. Yeah.
I was wondering, what are the biggest outstanding research questions in your field with respect to interventions designed to affect educational attainment?
We a policymaker really needs to have a cupboard full of proven interventions to choose from. If you're a school district, a superintendent, if you're a principal, if you want to choose a curriculum, or beyond a curriculum, if you want in a school district, one of the things that New York City does very well in this charter school set of charter schools in Chicago do very well is they have a principal training program that's very well thought out. These don't just happen, and especially with curricula. You've got a huge textbook industry that's trying to sell school districts with curricula. Much of it is unproven. Schools will adopt a kind of latest fad, and they won't really know whether it's going to be effective or not. I think, and there's been a move afoot actually in the Bush administration, first of all, in trying to fund a lot more evaluation studies of curriculum, so that we can actually separate the good curricula from the bad curricula. We have to know not only in terms of basic subjects, but are there whole school reforms? Success for All is an example of a whole school reform that seems to have been proven effective. What models are there for an integrated curriculum and for professional development, for coaching? What system do we really need to have in place that's going to be proven to be effective in terms of boosting the achievement levels of kids? And we have fragmentary knowledge about that now. We need tons more of that, because we know what the problem is, right? We have some suggestions of what the solution might be. A lot of the solutions I talked about aren't likely to be doable with declining low levels of funding that we have now and declining levels of funding. I think to some extent you can rearrange expenditures and try to put some of these innovations in place, but we need, if this is hypothetical, but what would happen if we really did have a set of proven policies that where you could convince someone that if you really put these things in place, the school achievement levels of kids would almost certainly improve, as has been shown in the studies. So I would hope that you'd have a whole shelf load of these kinds of proven interventions that people developing funding formulas for schools, that people running school districts and principals running schools would be able to turn to actually see what's been proven to be effective.
Other countries are surpassing the United States by leaps and bounds in this area.
Right.
Is there a national organization that's looking at other countries and what they're doing right and how we can model ourselves? I was just reading today, I forget what paper it was, it's talked about South Korea having education geared towards what is economically viable, as opposed to in this country. I'm all for liberal arts. I think without it we suffer as a country. However, we need to start thinking about, and I think we are thinking about STEM education and the things that we're lagging. And is there an entity in our country that looks at other countries and say, what are you doing that we could learn from?
I think a lot of people are trying to make sense out of the experience of other countries. It's tough because countries differ in hundreds of ways, right? And it's hard to pull out the elements that make the most difference. Part of it is what the push from families is versus what schools can do. The Korean example, all the Asian countries have kids often come to schools with families that are obsessed with achievement of their kids, right? And it's a different kind of family background than is often the case in the United States. So even though kids might be doing better in Korean schools, you can't necessarily attribute that higher level of achievement just to the schools. So it's a tricky thing to try to tease out. But at the same time, if you ask elementary school teachers in other countries to explain the intuition behind simple mathematical procedures. Right? Why do you invert and multiply fractions? Other country teachers are trained sufficiently to be able to give several answers to that. U.S. teachers typically can't. The kind of training levels that teachers have in many of the subjects is very different. That probably has an effect also. The curricula in Singapore, there's a Singapore math curriculum that you might have heard of. You can actually get it from Amazon.com, and it's in part responsible for the sky-high levels of achievement in Singapore. But again, to what extent is it that curriculum versus the teachers versus the families? It's a difficult problem. A lot of people are trying to piece it out. But the U.S. is, every country is different in its own way. And I think what's important is to try to look to other countries to see what the models might be. But then we've got to bring them back, adapt them to the U.S. context, and then actually test out whether they're going to be effective or not. That's the sequence of events, I think, that has to take place.
Great, thanks very much.